Okay, great. So Dr. Küntzel worked on that topic of anti-Semitism and Islamistic streams. Tonight in his presentation, he will talk about the Hamas-Massacre and talk about the question to which extent this massive attack on Israel has shocked the entire world, not just Israel, and also talk about anti-Semitic ideology. Before Dr. Küntzel starts with the presentation, I would just like to tell you one thing. From the 28th of July to the 9th of August, we've got the ISGAP summer school in Oxford, where the professors, but also students, talk about the question how to teach this issue of anti-Semitism at university. You can learn more about it on the ISGAP webpage. There's still some free seats for those who are interested. I think it's also important to not just talk about anti-Semitism, but also how to teach this issue. But as I said, more information is on the web page. And then before I give the floor to Mr. Küntzel, I'd like to draw attention to some of the books that Dr. Küntzel wrote about that topic. I just need to share my screen. Can you see my slides now? Okay, currently it's the most current book by Dr. Matthias Küntzel is Nazis, Islamic Antisemitism and the Middle East. It was published this year, so it's very recent. In the year 2019, there was a book in German, Nazis and the Middle East, how the Islamic anti-Semitism was created. And then also a 2007 book, Jihad and True Hatred, Islamism, Nazism. So these are the most current books on the topic. And I'd also like to say thank you to Dr. Küntzel. Thank you for being here. We'll talk for about 30 minutes, and after that, there will be the possibility to ask questions. Dr. Küntzel, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Magnoi Gröschel. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I'd like to thank them for their interest. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure, and I'm honored to open this webinar series on the many faces of anti-Semitism with a presentation on the Hamas-Massacre and its consequences. The Hamas-Massacre marks a turning point both in the history of anti-Semitism and in the history of the Middle East. On October 7, 1,200 Israelis were murdered. In terms of Germany, that would be the same as if a terrorist attack had resulted in 10,600 victims. However, it is not only the scale of the crime that is shocking, but also its target. It was against Jews. They wanted to kill as many Jews as possible or abuse them as hostages. This was not the work of common murderers who killed for their own benefit or out of calculation. Rather, it was the work of pathological enemies of the Jews, in whose eyes every Jew is guilty because he is a Jew, and who therefore pursue a noble and higher mission to make the world clean of Jews. A massacre like this will always be repeated, the Hamas declared, until Israel is completely destroyed. And it is quite clear, if the Israeli armed forces had not intervened on the 7th of October, Hamas extermination squads would have continued to kill without end. The 7th of October 2023 revealed a brutal will to annihilation that threatens Israel and Jews worldwide. How can this will to annihilate be explained ideologically and historically? Is it a response to Israel's policy? And if not, what is it? My answer to this question has to do with the Hamas basic program. It's a 1988 charter, which is still valid today. This charter combines two different sources of Jew hatred. Firstly, the anti-Jihadism of early Islam, which arose in the 7th century as a result of Muhammad's battles against the Jews of Medina. Here, Jews are imagined as weak and cowardly. Secondly, the European anti-Semitism of the 20th century, which portrays Jews as superior and accuses them of a world conspiracy. My lecture will therefore consist of 4 parts. The first part is about European anti-Semitism and in the Hamas Charter and the role of Nazi Germany in its entrenchment. The second part will deal with the connection between this charter and early Islam and the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood, whose Palestinian arm Hamas sees itself as. The third part will deal with the comparison between the anti-Semitism of the Nazis and that of Hamas. Where are the similarities? Where are the differences? Finally, in the fourth and last part, I will look at the significance of this discussion on anti-Semitism. Part 1. It was not only the bestial actions of the perpetrators on the 7th of October that were reminiscent of the atrocities committed by the Nazi Einsatzgruppen. The ideological justifications are also similar, as can be seen from the Hamas Charter of 1988. In it, not Israel but the Jews are declared to be the enemy of the world, a world enemy that supposedly controls the media and the United Nations and is responsible for all revolutions in the world. What's more, just like the Nazis, the Charter claims that Jews not only instigated the First World War, but also the Second World War. In Article 22, it states, I cite, they were behind the First World War, where they managed to eliminate the state of Islamic Caliphate, and where they were behind the Second World War, where they made huge profits from the trade in war goods. There is no war going on here or there without them having their fingers behind it. End of quote. And just like Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf, the Charter also cites the so-called Protocols of the Elders of Zion as evidence for Jewish behavior. It is a hatred of Jews that sounds as if it has been copied directly from the pages of the Stürmer, as the Palestinian politician Sarin Nossebi rightly observed. But how did the Nazis' hatred of Jews end up in Hamas? I would like to outline this transfer of ideology in 4 steps. Firstly, meetings between Nazi agents and the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, who also hated Jews and also wanted to bring down the Zionist project, took place as early as the 1930s with the expressed approval of Joseph Goebbels. In its charter, Hamas describes itself as the wing of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine and sees itself in a tradition with the anti-Zionist Jihad since the 1930s. At the time, Nazi Germany not only transferred large sums of money to the Muslim Brotherhood, but also organized joint training events with them on the Jewish question and so-called Palestine meetings. And they supported their most important ally, the Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini. This all took place 10 years before the founding of Israel, so it has nothing to do with Israeli politics. Secondly, Nazis launched the radio propaganda in Arabic from 1993, which also reached the illiterate masses. In this way, Goebbels' anti-Semitism reached the Arab world every evening between April 1933 and April 1945. The programs were broadcast from the shortwave broadcasting facilities in Seesen, a town south of Berlin, and were characterized by two special features. On the one hand, the German radio producers disguised themselves as particularly devout friends of Islam. Secondly, the broadcasts from Berlin were characterized by massive anti-Semitism. I quote, kill the Jews, set fire to the property, destroy the businesses, annihilate these vile helpers of British imperialism, quote, and was the message in Arabic from Berlin, for example, as Rommel's Panzer Army Africa advanced on Cairo in 1942. This all took place 6 years before the founding of Israel, so it has nothing to do with Israeli politics. For the Arab world, this 6-year period of constant Nazi bombardment every evening proved to be a turning point that divided the history of the Middle East into a before and an after. It promoted an exclusively anti-Jewish reading of the Quran. It popularized the anti-Semitic world conspiracy myth and shaped a genocidal rhetoric towards Zionism. Thirdly, even after the victory over Hitler, anti-Semitism remained virulent in the Arab world. The Muslim Brotherhood now had over 1 million members, making it the largest anti-Semitic movement in the world. When the war criminal Amin al-Husseini returned to Cairo unmolested in 1946, the Muslim Brotherhood was delighted. This hero, they declared, found with the help of Hitler and Germany against Zionism. Germany and Hitler are no more, but Amin al-Husseini will continue the fight. End of quote. Indeed, in the years that followed, the Mufti and the Muslim Brotherhood were instrumental in overturning the two-state solution for Palestine, which the United Nations had passed in 1947 by war. In its charter, Hamas emphasized its connection to this war as well. It began on the day Israel was founded, so it has nothing to do with Israeli politics. Fourthly, all through these Arab states suffered a defeat in 1948 in the attempt to wipe out Israel, which was founded that year. The idea of destroying Israel remained in the air. The Muslim Brotherhood passed the baton to the Iranian cleric Ruhollah Mousavi, who would later become famous as Ruhollah Khomeini. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Tehran has been considered the center of the effort to destroy Israel as the state of the Jews. In 1988, Hamas, which is supported by Tehran, finally took up this course. It is no coincidence that its charter quotes the same anti-Semitic slogans that had previously reached the Arab world via Nazi radio. The theological continuity that links the year 1941 with the year 2023 is obvious. This brings me to part 2, the connection between the Charter and the early Islam and the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. Even if the Hamas justified its hostility towards Jews with slogans of modern anti-Semitism, its charter is nevertheless a deeply religious document that quotes the Quran 33 times and declares the annihilation of Jews to be a religious duty of all Muslims. In Article 7 of the Charter, for example, Hamas vows, based on a hadith from the 7th century, to fulfill the promise of God. Thus, that the hour of resurrection will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews. The Muslims will kill them until the Jew hides behind the stone and the tree, and the stone and the tree will say, O Muslim, O servant of God, there's a Jew behind me. Come and kill him. End of quote. In retrospect, this passage reads like an instructional manual for the sadistic actions of the perpetrators of the 7th of October. In Article 8, immediately afterwards, Hamas adopts the central slogan of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which is essential to understand the inner logic of Islamist madness, at least to some extent. Entitled the slogan of the Islamic resistance movement, it reads, quote, God is their goal, the messenger of God is their role model, the Quran is their institution, Jihad is their path, and the death of the cause of God is their most sublime wish. End of quote. But what does the slogan, the Quran is our institution, mean, for example? It means that Hamas wants a theocracy in which peoples do not decide on laws, but the Quran is the constitution, so that means the supreme law. It is therefore also clear why Hamas hates Israel. Not primarily for what its government does, but for what it is, a self-determined democracy. What does the call mean? Jihad is our way. It means that peace negotiations are not only rejected, but actively torpedoed. On the 7th of October, the Hamas declared its intention to destroy the rapprochement process between Saudi Arabia and Israel. A peace with Israel that would also benefit the Palestinians, that is the nightmare of the Hamas leadership, which wants Israel's destruction. It wants to exploit the suffering of those living in Gaza instead of eliminating it. This is another reason why it is simply absurd to keep blaming Israel for the Palestinians' lack of prospects, even though it is the Islamists alone who need and produce this lack of prospects in order to keep gaining new recruits for the Jihad. The final slogan of the Muslim Brotherhood is, to die for Allah is our most sublime wish. According to the Quran, a martyr's death secures the person killed a privileged place in paradise. And since the Quran is known to always be right, this results in a win-win situation for jihadists. Either they win in this world, or they die and enjoy the paradise of the afterlife. We are considered a nation of martyrs, explained Hamas leader Ghazi Hamad, and we are proud to sacrifice martyrs. For Islamists, however, not only their own life, but also the life of other Muslims has no value. They are abused and sacrificed as mass as human shields. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh puts it this way, quote, we need the blood of the women, children, and the elderly of Gaza to fill our revolutionary spirit with life, end of quote. And indeed, without these human shields, the Hamas would be very weak and long since defeated. The blood of uninvolved civilians is the strongest weapon. So while in all other wars, weapons are supposed to protect people, in the war that Hamas is waging against the Jews, it is people who are supposed to protect the weapons with their bodies. The more Arab civilians are killed, the better for the Hamas propaganda that Israel is out to kill civilians, especially children. For Israel, this is a lose-lose situation. Either it loses the rocket war because it cannot defend itself, or it defends itself and loses the propaganda war. So it is not only hatred of Jews that determines Hamas behavior, but also the Quran, the idea of jihad and martyrdom. It is a religious war, and therefore an irreconcilable war that Hamas is waging against Israel and the Jews. Anyone who ignores the religious motive on Hamas, which is the rule in the West, will hardly be able to understand the inner logic of its behavior. This brings me to part 3, the comparison between the Nazis' hatred of Jews and that of Hamas. Here we come across similarities and differences. A common intersection between the Nazis' hatred of Jews and that of Hamas is, first of all, that Jews are dehumanized in the run-up to the massacres. The Nazis regarded them as vermin, while the Islamists see them as apes or pigs. And the Islamists repeatedly refer to Israel as a malignant, cancerous tumor. What does this metaphor imply? Firstly, a tumor is characterized by its insidiousness because it grows imperceptibly. Secondly, a tumor is expansive because it does not stop growing. And thirdly, it is deadly. To save the person, you have to remove the tumor, in this case Israel, and throw it in the bin. Israel as waste for the garbage can. This image takes dehumanization to the extreme. Another common characteristic is paranoid fantasy. Just as the Nazis convinced themselves and others that the Jews wanted to wipe out Germany, the Mufti claimed that the Jews have been the bitterest opponents of Islam and are still trying to destroy it, as stated in a 1937 pamphlet entitled Islam Judaism. There are 16 million Jews and 1.9 million Muslims in the world. These figures alone show how absurd this extermination propaganda is. In both cases, one's extermination ambitions were or are projected onto the Jews in order to legitimize them. This projection reveals another commonality between the ideologies of the Nazis and the Hamas, a commonality that Holocaust researcher Saul Friedlander has described as redemptive anti-Semitism. Like the Nazis, Hamas believes its own lies about the destructive influence of Jews worldwide. Just as the Nazis saw the destruction of Judaism as a decisive means of bringing internal German peace to the world, Hamas anti-Semitism is also based on a destructive utopia, according to which the destruction of the Jews is the prerequisite for the liberation of humanity under the auspices of Islam. It is part of the nature of Islam, explained Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, that it extends its law to all nations and its power to the entire planet. While the internal logic of the anti-Semitic delusion thus shows important similarities between the Nazis' hatred of Jews and the Hamas, the differences clearly dominate in the execution of the murderous acts. Whilst the Nazis tried to hide the crimes of the Shoah in a makeshift manner, the Hamas Islamists equipped themselves with body cams and helmet cameras to broadcast their bestial murders via social media. They wanted the whole world to witness the atrocities as spectators in order to intimidate the infidels and at the same time infect the believers with the jubilation and certainty of victory. Religious certainty breaks through here. The Allah Akbar, which accompanied the crimes committed as if in a bloodlust, testifies to the conviction that by murdering Jews, they were fulfilling a mission ordered by God, the success of which is considered a priori assured. In our secularized world, we have no idea what religion means to Orthodox Muslims. For them, Islamic history is nothing other than the completion of the purpose of human history under divine guidance. There is no questions in their mind that Islam will prove its superiority, even if it means massacring Jews. And this is why they propagate the massacre of the 7th of October as a model, as a stage of liberation. The Nazis, on the other hand, frowned upon pogroms. Here, a huge bureaucratic apparatus was set in motion to carry out the murder of millions of Jews objectively and with cold blood. The examination of the Jews was integrated into an intellectual, sophisticated, and rational analysis, as Ulrich Herbert writes. This does not make Islamic anti-Semitism any more harmless. On the contrary, while the Nazis were the first to try to deny the Shoah, leading Islamists such as Said Qutb and Yusuf al-Qadawani have aggressively defended the Holocaust and interpreted it as a punishment intended by God, a punishment that the Muslims would inflict on the Jews next time. The Islamists in Iran are preparing for this task today. We must carefully analyze the ideological motives behind the Hamas-Massacre, not least because of the fightings that can be experienced in the future. However, there is no question of this at present, which brings me to my fourth and final part, significance of the discussion about Hamas anti-Semitism. Globally, the reactions to the most horrific massacre of Jews since the Shoah were devastating. It was as if someone had opened Pandora's box. People almost always pointed the finger at the murdered instead of the murderers. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid put it this way, quote, "People saw Jews being murdered, raped, and imprisoned, and decided that the Jews were to blame. They saw that Jews were the victims of a terrorist attack, and that only increased the hatred of Jews." Many of these people are anti-Semites. They subconsciously or consciously want a world without Jews. Others may not be malicious, but stupid. They believe that there must be plausible reasons for the terror and blame Israel. If they were to study anti-Semitism, they would quickly learn that our everyday logic of cause and effect does not apply to anti-Semitism. We have to keep reminding ourselves that that was not slightest social or otherwise plausible cause for the murder of 6 million Jews. This same applies to the murder of the 1,200 Jews a few weeks ago. However, as long as people do not want to know about anti-Semitism as the ideological driving force, the Israeli victims of terror are blamed for it. According to the motto, the worst the terror, the worse Israel's guilt. This is what happened in many parts of the world after the 7th of October, and this explains the devastating victim-perpetrator reversal that Lapid talks about. People see how Jews are being murdered and decide that the Jews are to blame. Even in Israel, the importance of Hamas ideology was and is underestimated. The surprising thing about the 7th of October was not the disinhibition with which the Arabs from Gaza killed Jews. The surprising thing was the total failure of the Israeli security services. Even they made the fatal mistake of not taking the anti-Semitic ideology of Hamas literally and seriously. Few have spoken about this as openly as Danny Dayan, the chairman of the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. Quote, "We at Yad Vashem," he explained shortly after the massacre, are experts in Nazi ideology, but not in the barbaric ideology of Hamas. We have not researched it. But why was Nazi ideology dismissed as the past instead of researching it, even where it touches the present, as in the case of the Hamas-Massacre? If the Israeli authorities had recognized in time how much the ideology of Hamas has in common with the barbaric Nazi ideology, the massacre of the 7th of October might have been prevented. Regrettably, even some of the best-known Holocaust researchers, such as Christopher Browning and Omer Batov, currently do not want to know about any points of contact between Hamas and the Nazi ideology. I quote Browning and Batov, quote, "The reference to the Holocaust obscures our understanding of the anti-Semitism the Jews face today and dangerously distorts the reason for the violence in Israel and Palestine." They claim in an open letter to the misuse of Holocaust memory, which was also signed by Stephanie Schüler-Springorum, the director of the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism at Technical University in Berlin. The real reasons for the Hamas massacre can only be found in Israel in, quote, 75 years expulsion, 56 years of occupation, and 16 years of the Gaza blockade. There is a danger that Nazi comparisons will be used in an inflationary manner. Neither are the Hamas murderers the Nazis of today, nor did we experience a new Holocaust on the 7th of October. However, this does not absolve us from the task of carefully analyzing the current links between Nazi ideology and getting to the bottom of the motives for the massacre. Anyone who turns a blind eye to the wording of Hamas indeed does not even mention it, as it is the case in the aforementioned open letter, favors the perpetrator-victim reversal instead of opposing it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Küntzel, for this very good and short, precise, and concentrated presentation. You now have the possibility to ask questions if you'd like to do so. You've got this symbol of a hand. You can raise your hand. And in the meantime, while you raise your hand, or there might be a question in the chat, you can type your question to the chat as well. The first question to you, Dr. Küntzel, you have you described the ideology worldview that was created in a collaboration between National Socialists and Islamists in the 20th century. What do you say are the factors that contributed to this ideology still being there today? And where are points where we could begin via social activity, political activity, to try to contribute to question these ideas? Well, you have to think about the fact that anti-Semitism never disappeared entirely. It was continued under different signs in the 70s via the Soviet Union. Most of the time, this anti-Semitic basic motivation that was renewed in different shapes or forms. So it's kind of an anti-Semitic chameleon. It adapts to the new situation. And this is what gave the Islamists the possibility to continue their anti-Semitism. But when you think about Islamists, they hate differences. The most important difference for people is the difference between men and women. And for Islamists, they know that, or they think that women should be below the man. So this opposition, this massive suppression of women, just like animal husbandry in Gaza, in Iran, and most importantly in Afghanistan, we can see this. So recognizing differences is something that Islamists do not like. They reject it. They want homogeneity, and Jews bother them in this idea. So over the decades, the Jews were their main enemy. So what can we do against that? Well, we have to fathom what anti-Semitism means. We have to understand that anti-Semitism is not a reaction to Jewish behavior. It has never been the case. And that's why we cannot look at that's also why the behavior of dark-skinned people cannot explain racism. They are victims of racism, and that also applies to anti-Semitism. It is all often interpreted as if it was the result of Israeli politics, and this is wrong, and we have to fight this presentation. We have to make clear to people what anti-Semitism actually means, and I think that's the most important approach here to fight this idea of Jews being parasites, this mad idea, and we have to we will not be able to destroy this idea, but we can limit the possibility to talk about this openly. Thank you very much. Philip Spivak, please.
Simple question. How do we correct it? How do we get rid of the anti-Semitism? I put together a presentation called Christianity's Jewish Roots with Music and Humor. It's about an hour and a half long, stretching it a little. And the idea is you can't change anybody's mind without making them laugh first. I've done it at 6 churches, 4 Jewish organizations, a couple of Christian churches, or Christian schools, and a few other spots with generally very good results. But, you know, with the rapid anti-Semitism going on all over the place and the war happening, I'm not sure this is the time for it, but I know maybe it's overtime. What do you
Next up is Carolyn Arones.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Küntzel. I wanted to ask you what I'm seeing, and everything was very informative and helpful. But what I'm seeing is that new accusations of Israel and Jews of being Nazi themselves and for doing genocide in Gaza. So I wanted to hear your thoughts of how this falls into the narrative of anti-Semitism by Hamas. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions, and we still have a translation going on. So I keep speaking German, but we can still all understand me. So I've got 3 more questions. Charles Rose, Daniel Belamid, and Stephen Goldstein.
The issue I bring up
Can
is,
we?
I'm sorry, am I allowed to speak? The question is not, anti-Semitism is a subset of a broader issue. It's an attack on morality. And the attack on morality is broader. It's an attack on democracy. It's an attack on Western civilization. What's going on today and what has been going on for a long time is a delegitimization of humanity. And barbarism, Islamism, is synonymous with barbarism. And the democracies of the world, led by the United States, are withdrawing from defending democracy. There have been hundreds of attacks by the Iranians. The Iranians have the vision of Soleimani was to use the proxies as arms of the Iranian government to destroy the Jewish people and to ultimately destroy America and to destroy Western civilization. That vision is still in place. And the anti-Semitic narrative is a front to the broader narrative of the Islamic revolution, to export the Islamic revolution, to export Islamism to the rest of the world. And I really think that the narrative of anti-Semitism has to be looked at as a front to the Islamic issues that are there today. And unfortunately, the Jewish state is fighting a war with the rest of the democracies of the world not really assisting it. And that's really a dangerous situation. And I'd like your thoughts, please. Yes. Several African countries have become dominated. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm done. Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, if I can just push you a little bit more on your second point about Hamas and Islamism being a religious movement. I mean, obviously you're right. If you look at the Hamas Charter, it takes a lot from Islamic texts. It would be stupid to deny that. I'm not denying that for one moment. But what about the argument put forward by people like Bassam Tibi that it's better seen as a kind of religionized politics, that it is 20th century and now 21st century politics, but kind of wrapped in a religious form. So it's not really, in that view anyway, not accurate to talk about it being a kind of coming from an ancient Islamic tradition, even though it does wrap itself in that kind of language from the Quran and the Hadith and so on.
Greetings from Jerusalem. When I looked out of the window, I didn't see any rockets, so it seems to be calm today. Matthias Küntzel, we met in Munich and in Berlin. When I went to Germany, I made 30 films about Germany, Israel, and Holocaust. So my question is, how involved is Germany in Israel's security? Germany always says the security of Israel also means German security, but we don't see that. For the past 30 years, we heard about Gaza, and we went to Germany to show that Germany has paid money to anti-Semitic even in German, even in textbooks, students learn about if you kill 2 Jews a day, how many Jews do you kill per week? And these books were paid for by Germany. So we found machinery in Gaza, and these were all made in Germany. So the question is, Germany is not does stand with Germany with Israel, but it also support the Arabic side as well. I just wanted to a little bit more about that. Thank you very much for the event, and greetings from Jerusalem. Thank you very much for your question and for your commitment. I didn't know that they found weapons in Gaza made in Germany. That's new to me. Not weapons, but the production of machinery for the production of rockets. That's new to me. I have to do more research on that. But you're right about the propaganda that Hamas is doing, and the BLO also does anti-Semitic propaganda. And unfortunately, Germany indirectly funds this as well. And this is a scandal, of course. And I agree with you. Germany tries to find a position in the middle. It's not a decisive position against anti-Semitism, but they themselves believe that the Palestinians suffer under the Israelis, despite the fact that there were so many opportunities for Palestinians to create peaceful coexistence with Israel. There were plans from 1937, from 2000, and it was always the leaders of the Islamists or the radical forces who rejected these possibilities. But in Germany, we don't see that properly. I feel like in Germany, there's the feeling that they're in charge for, or they have to take care of the Israelis, but also take care of the Palestinians. But that's rubbish. It goes to show that they do not know the history of Middle East. That it was the opposite, actually, that Nazis helped setting up anti-Semitism and helped made sure that there was no peace with Israel. So looking at the history is important to show how they missed opportunities, that how the Arab world was always separated into radical and moderate forces, and from Germany in particular, people mostly supported the radical forces, and that's something that we have to tell the world about. And this also is something that where I work on as a researcher. Unfortunately, we have to finish this session. We scheduled 1 hour, and I'd like to stick to the schedule. So I agree with you, Dr. Küntzel. Thank you very much for your contribution, for this very good contribution, in my opinion. So this was the first session of our 12-part webinar series. Next week, on the 13th of February, that's the next session. At the same time, we will have an opportunity to talk about a topic that we are going to talk about a lot of different shapes and faces of anti-Semitism in this series. And next week, I try to find a common denominator of these faces to show that something can look different on the surface actually have the same content wherever anti-Semitism comes from, so that there are ideological commonalities. And in the week of the 20th of February, we've got Daniel Billing from the Technical University of Berlin, a young researcher who looked at anti-Semitism in social media, and he talks about who posts what about Jews on what is called X now, but used to be Twitter, with a lot more presentations. You can see it on our webpage. I'd like to thank you all for participating today. I'd also like to draw attention to Dr. Künzel's books again that I can warmly recommend to you. And I'd also like to thank you for being here today. We hope that we see you in one of our next sessions, wherever you may be now. I hope you have a lovely night, evening, or day. Thank you very much. Shalom, shalom from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.